the opportunity to share some of this information with you, and also to tell you a little bit about the techniques that you'll be introduced to on this DVD. I actually have been very interested in psychology and physics and other things ever since I grew up some few years ago. I've studied Thomas Kuhn's, I've studied Albert Einstein, a lot of different physicists that have made a lot of different discoveries, and it's very common knowledge today that physics and psychology go very much in hand. There's a lot of different resources available that you can research for yourself to find out even more than some of the things that we might be able to teach you. One of the things that I really like about being able to do the techniques based on the way the brains and actually even quantum physics is working is that it's not us telling you what it is that you need to change, nor is it us or anyone else telling you the way that it is that you need to go about changing to become the person that you'd prefer to be. The really exciting thing to me about these techniques is that you get to decide what it is that you would like to change. You get to decide what goals or desired outcomes you would prefer. A lot of times, especially in standardized kind of psychology or human services, you end up getting a lot of what others think would make you happiest. Oftentimes, leaving you dependent on the person that's helping you, rather than becoming independent of your own, to be able to know for yourself how to help yourself in any given moment. And a lot of the techniques that we've created, and even the ones that are going to be on this DVD that you're watching, these are the kind of techniques that once you learn how to do them, you could do them in public and do them in just a few moments, just in your mind, with just a step here and a step here and a step back. They're very simple to do, and when it's done, you're the person who gets to experience the change. And the change has come from within you and not something that someone else has decided would be best for you. And I really enjoy that about the techniques.
One of the things that I like most about the techniques you're going to learn are that, like Janey said, you're in charge. When we first learned this information, I was very excited to begin to understand how truly incredible each human being is. And once we have the guidebook as to how to take charge of our life, it's simple, it's easy, which does not mean that it's not a lifelong pursuit to overcome the issues and the problems that we have in our life. Still, it's something that a child can do because repetition, compounding, and the law of reverse effect are laws which we have utilized, though innocently, since we were very, very young children. Now, you will be taught and have the opportunity to do techniques utilizing these laws that allows you to be totally in charge of whatever outcomes you are going to experience.
One of the things that you'll notice we'll be dealing with quite a bit as we walk you through these techniques is just what we call sensory symbols. Through our sense of sight and sound and touch and smell and taste, and we use a sixth sense, the sense of intuition or energy. It's except for our sensory experiences of our world, it's really difficult for most of us to be able to experience the world if we can't see it or hear it or have some sort of sensory experiences regarding our world. The subconscious can process all of this information, sensory and even more. And the information first comes into the subconscious before the information comes to conscious. And only 5, 7, or 9 bits of sensory information can come into conscious in any 0.22 of a second. We end up, like Linda mentioned, programming certain sensory responses or symbols that we become very accustomed to. And oftentimes we end up missing out on different sensory experiences that others can have, even though that sensory information is stored in our subconscious.
What Janey and I have learned in hypnotherapy school and in our various endeavors for research is that we have the subconscious mind, we have the conscious mind, and then we have the limbic system. And all of those have a tremendous effect on what our life experiences truly are going to be. Now, the subconscious does not know the difference between right or wrong, real or imagined, nor is there any time orientation. It just is, like a giant hard drive of a computer. On the other hand, the conscious mind is very aware of what is right and wrong, according to our standards, according to what we have programmed. The conscious mind is also aware of time orientation and the difference between real or imagined. Now, the subconscious can have a gazillion pieces of information come into it, as Janey was saying. And all it's doing is sorting things and deciding whether this information will free float or if it will go into one file or another file. And it will look through information to find out what matches what is coming into the subconscious. On the other hand, the conscious mind can only have up to 9 pieces of information, as Janey said in 0.22 of a second. Therefore, we also have programs that we created determining what pieces of information, as all of these pieces come in, we want to be consciously aware of. The subconscious, the conscious, and the limbic system. With these 3, as Janey calls them brains, as these 3 work together throughout our neurology, we experience life as we have programmed it to be.
The information is in our subconscious. These techniques will help you get the information that you need to overcome life's daily problems, or even more so than daily problems, and also help you to attain your goals and your desired outcomes. These techniques help conscious get the information that it needs from subconscious so that you consciously can decide and choose and make your own decisions and create your own life experience. This experiential technique we call the walk of attraction. So, as long as you know you've consciously chosen whatever it is that you're choosing to attract to yourself, please stand up and I'll walk you through the technique. Thank you. Now, if you would please, on a location on the ground, somewhere between 3 or 5 feet in front of you, place or imagine placing whatever it is that you are choosing to attract to yourself. All aspects of whatever you've chosen to attract to yourself in this location. Thank you. And now, if you would please, on the ground between yourself and the location of the object of your attraction, if you would please, we're going to sensory symbolize the between of yourself and the object of your attraction. And so first, if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine whatever color and shape might be between yourself and the object of your attraction. The color and shape of between. And then if you would please imagine this color and shape is actually located, placed on the ground between yourself and the object of your attraction. Thank you. And now if you would please imagine or pretend to imagine the sound of the between yourself and the object of your attraction. The sound of the between. And when you've imagined or pretend to imagine the sound of the between, imagine placing also the sound on the ground between yourself and the object of your attraction. Thank you. Now, if you would please, imagine the smell and the taste of what's between yourself and the object of your attraction. And when you have imagined or pretended to imagine the smell and taste of between, imagine placing the smell and taste on the ground between yourself and the object of your attraction. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine the texture of between yourself and the object of your attraction. And when you've imagined or pretended to imagine the texture of between yourself and the object of your attraction, imagine or pretend to imagine placing the texture symbol on the ground between yourself and the object of your attraction. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine the energy between yourself and the object of your attraction. And when you've imagined the energy of the between, imagine the energy being placed on the ground between yourself and the object of your attraction. Thank you. Now, if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine the object of your attraction, noticing the sensory symbols of how you've imagined the between yourself and the object of your attraction. Imagine it looking at the color and the shape that you've placed between, of the between. And if it has any different color and shape, imagine that the object of your attraction might place a different color and shape if it chooses as you imagine, regarding what it may perceive being between you and it. And if it's placed anything different, then imagine or pretend to imagine adjusting the color and the shape so that through looking at each of them through lenses, imagine adjusting for more equal focus, similarity in brightness or dimness, in color, so that the two objects and colors can become one and more similar. Thank you. And imagine or pretend to imagine the object of your attraction, noticing the sound that you've imagined of the between you and it. And if it, as you imagine, has any different concepts of sound that might be between you and the object of your attraction, imagine that it places the sound that it may imagine to be hearing. And if it's placed any different sound between yourself and it, imagine adjusting volume knobs for similarities and other sound levels so that the two different sounds, if there are, become similar and can become one. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine that the object of your attraction notices the smell and the taste that you've imagined and placed between you and it. And imagine that it considers. And imagine and pretend to imagine, however you choose, whatever smell or taste, if different, that it might imagine between yourself and the object of your attraction. And if any different, imagine it places them on the ground between you. Thank you. And if you would please, if there's any different smells or taste, imagine again that you're adjusting to make the smells and the taste more similar in volume, in fragrance, in flavor, in spice, however you choose to make the smell and taste more similar so they can become one between. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine that the object of your attraction notices what you may have laid down for texture of what is perceived to be between yourself and it. And imagine or pretend to imagine that if it imagines any different texture at all, that it lays it down next to yours. Thank you. And imagine, or pretend to imagine, with the textures, if there's any different, imagine or pretend to imagine adjusting thermostat so that the textures are more similar in temperature, even adjusting to the point where the different textures can become more similar and together as one. Thank you. And now if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine the object of your attraction, noticing your symbol of energy of what you perceive might be between you and it. And if it has any difference at all as you imagine or pretend to imagine, imagine it lays energy symbol down there on the ground between you and the object of your attraction. Thank you. And if any different energy symbol is there, imagine that the energies is going into a machine where different printouts of the waves and patterns of energy are coming out. And imagine just adjusting the knobs of the printouts of the different energies until just even the printouts of the energies become one. Thank you. Now, if you would please, for a moment, imagine or pretend to imagine and notice the color and the shape of what might be between you and the object of your attraction. And if you'd make any adjustments, or if it would make any adjustments, please do so now. And adjusting focus, if need be, brightness, if need be, till they become one. Thank you. And you look at sound and imagine the object of your attraction looking at sound. And if either imagine or pretend to imagine any differences, lay that there on the ground. And then imagine adjusting volume and tone and tune till the two sounds are similar and become one. Thank you. And if you would please, with smell and taste, you notice the symbol now of smell and taste, and imagine that it notices the symbol of smell and taste, and if either have any difference or imagine difference, imagine they also are laid on the ground between you. And adjustments again are made for smell and taste, for volume, for fragrance, for flavor, more and more if need be, till they become more and more similar and can become one. Thank you. Now, if you would please, you notice texture and imagine or pretend to imagine the object of your attraction noticing texture now. If any difference at all needs to be made, imagine either making those different textures of the between and laying it between. And imagine adjusting thermostat on either, in both, whatever you choose to the point that they become similar and can become one. Thank you. And if you would please, energy. You notice energy symbol. In imagine or pretend to imagine, it notices energy symbol. In imagine or pretend that either or both makes adjustments. In imagine or pretend when this is done and it's on the ground, that the energy is going into the machine. And the printout comes out. And the knobs on the printout are adjusted by you to the point that the waves and the lengths are similar to the point that they can become one. And notice how you feel. And notice where is this very thing, the object of your attraction, and where it is now. And also, if you would please, you may want to make some notes of the symbols and whatever else you might have learned as you did this walk of attraction. And I thank you very much. The paradigm shift technique, like the other techniques, is experiential. And when I say experiential, there's some of it that we're going to ask you to imagine, or you can even pretend to imagine. At the same time, you won't just be sitting or laying. We'll actually have you stand and follow the instructions that we give you. The significance of doing the techniques with this also moving helps the whole body from head to toe in the movement of the body to be able to be involved with the technique. And even just the experiential portion of the techniques make them more powerful. Now, when we do the shift in a moment, we'll ask that you determine exactly what it is that you'd like to shift. So it can be a thought that's not helping you, or a feeling, or an actual experience. And in addition to knowing exactly what it is that you'd like to shift, it's also important before you start the technique to know what you would like to shift to. So examples of those might be a situation in which you're not feeling like you're being heard at work or at home, and your preference would be just to be heard and to feel heard and to know that you're being heard. So you'd simply place out in front of you, somewhere on the ground, the experience you have of not feeling heard. And then follow our instructions and then place out on the ground your preferred experience of being or feeling heard, and then follow our instructions. The techniques are really very simple, and if you'll follow the process and let us walk you through them a few times before you try them on your own, we're confident that you'll get the actual processes and strategies of the techniques down where you can do them completely by yourself shortly.
The subconscious doesn't know the difference between right or wrong or real or imagined. It's not time-oriented. Therefore, if I say I have a specific problem and I'm going to put it here on the floor, my conscious mind says, that's ridiculous. It's not on the floor, Linda. However, my subconscious takes what the conscious says literally. If I say I'm putting this problem on the floor, to the subconscious, it is on the floor. When I symbolize something, and the subconscious works with symbols, when I symbolize something, this is real to the subconscious. I may not understand what a symbol means regarding a particular issue or problem on a conscious level. On the subconscious level, it is paramount.
The walk of attraction is also an experiential technique. It's similar to the quantum walk. The difference with the walk of attraction being that based on the concept of physics, attraction is actually related to gravity. And gravity is not in an object. Gravity exists between objects. Gravity is more along the lines of atmosphere and harder to see within our human senses. Still, the technique works. It's very powerful. And so we'll ask also that you stand prior as you do this technique. We'll ask that you know whatever it is that you're choosing to attract to yourself. And again, these things can be mental based, emotional based, physical based, and even spiritual based. These things can be all encompassing of these based. You choose. You choose. And then we'll just have you, after you stand, place out in front of you on the ground again, whatever it is that you choose to attract. And we'll do the sensory symbolizing between you and what you have chosen to attract. And I'll walk you through this technique as well. And with practice, you'll get to where you can do this technique by yourself. And like I said earlier, even in public where others won't even know what you're doing.
Not only are we physical beings, we are emotional beings, and we are spiritual beings. Therefore, we are also beings of energy. The energy flows through us. It is in our neurology and also in the surrounding area. If you have ever gotten very close to another individual, you may have felt the power of their energy. So when we're doing the walk of attraction, we're dealing with the energy, often that emanates from us, or other beings, or objects. And it's the energy that is in between ourselves and others, or other objects, that is the most powerful and is the most effective in this walk of attraction. Thank you.
technique is called the quantum walk. Now, as you prepare to do the quantum walk, it's very important that you, as in the other techniques, know exactly what it is that you're choosing to walk to. And again, your goal of walking to what you choose, it can be something as simple as a thought. You can imagine walking to the thought of knowing all the answers to a quiz coming up. You can do it to a feeling. You can walk, for example, to the feeling of joy regarding looking for a new job. You can do it to circumstances, or what Linda and I would call spiritual abstracts. You can do it to an actual object of matter, nature. You choose, but it's very important that you know exactly what it is that you're going to choose to walk to when you do the technique, the quantum walk. You'll also be asked to stand, and then you'll be asked also, like with the other techniques, to place what it is that you're choosing on the ground in front of you. The significance of placing it on the ground in front of you, or on the ground at all for whichever technique you're doing, the importance of on the ground is that that helps the subconscious recognize it as more real. The other thing regarding doing the quantum walk is also knowing where it is you're walking from without having whatever the desired outcome is that you're walking to. And when you know those things, you can go ahead and I'll walk you through the rest of the technique.
Regarding the quantum walk, it varies somewhat from the paradigm shift, in that when we're talking about the paradigm shift, we're going to compare things, look at things as they are now and as we desire them to be. When we're looking and dealing with the quantum walk, this is an experiential technique in that you will physically walk from the position that you are now to the position where you place the things and the symbols for that which you desire to be. Thank you.
This technique is the paradigm shift that I'll be walking you through. And all that you need to know for sure of yourself before doing this technique is exactly what it is that you'd like to shift, and exactly what it is you'd like to shift to. The shifting can be of a thought, a feeling, physical sensations, or general experiences. It's key significant to make sure it's about yourself. So as long as you've got that information, please stand up in front of me if you would. And I'll walk you through this paradigm shift. If you would please, find a location on the ground in front of you, 3 to 5 feet away. And on the ground at this location, place everything about whatever it is that you've chosen to shift. Be it a thought, feeling, whole circumstance, whatever you've chosen. Placing or imagining even to place. All aspects of this out in front of you, if you would, please. Thank you. And now, if you would, imagine or pretend to imagine the color in the shape of all of this that you've placed in front of you in this location. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine the sound of all of this that you've placed in this location in front of you. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine the smell and the taste that this might have that you've placed out in front of you. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine the texture of all that you've placed in this location in front of you. Thank you. And if you would please now, imagine or pretend to imagine the energy of all that you've placed in this location in front of you. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine or notice the feeling inside that you might have, where that feeling might be, and what that feeling inside of you might be like regarding all of this that you've placed in front of you. Thank you. And now that you've placed this in front of you and symbolized it through the senses and become aware or imagine to be aware of the feeling inside of you, where it might be and what it might be like, I ask now that, leaving all of this in front of you, take a step or two to the right, if you would please. Thank you. And now, if you would please, find a location on the ground, somewhere between maybe 3 and 5 feet in front of you. And in this location on the ground, put all aspects of what you have chosen to prefer instead of this other. And when you've imagined or pretend to imagine that all aspects of what you've chosen to prefer is in this location in front of you, I ask that you imagine or pretend to imagine the color in the shape of this, of your preference. Thank you. And imagine or pretend to imagine the sound of all of this. Thank you. And if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine the smell and the taste of all of this in front of you. Thank you. And if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine the texture of all of this that you've chosen. Thank you. And if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine the energy of all of this in front of you, of your choosing. Thank you. And now, having sensory symbolized this of your choosing, notice or imagine or pretend to imagine, to notice a feeling inside of you, where the feeling might be, and what the feeling regarding all of this might be like. Thank you. And now, if you would please, leaving all of this here, take a step back to where you began. Thank you. And starting from here, imagine or pretend to imagine comparing these two that you've placed in front of you. First, color and shape. And imagine or pretend to imagine that you're looking through two separate lenses at them each. And imagine or pretend to imagine adjusting different aspects of the lens, like focus, so that they're more similar in focus, and brightness or color, and panoramic or framed in, more similar as you choose to imagine them more similar. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine or pretend to imagine listening to the sound of each of these separately. And imagine through a soundboard where you can adjust volumes of each for more similar, and tone and other sounds, and imagine adjusting them to become more and more similar as you can imagine they might be. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine the two different textures of these. And imagine on texture, temperature. And imagine a thermostat for each texture. And imagine that you can turn the thermostat so the temperature of each is more similar. Thank you. And now, if you would please, for energy, imagine the energy being of each of these being fed into a machine that might print out the wave pattern of energy for each. And imagine, or just pretend to imagine, adjusting the printout so that just even on the printout, the pattern of wave, the length of wave, all aspects of the printout of each become more and more similar as you can imagine they may be. Thank you. And now it's up to you to choose to either completely dismiss where you began out here, thanking it if you dismiss it completely for all that it's taught you, and then inviting your choosing to take its place. You may also choose to thank this that's in front of you and not dismiss all of it, but invite your choosing to intertwine with it. This choice is yours. If you have chosen to thank this and dismiss it, then in a moment I'll count to 3. And in a moment when I say 3, imagine or pretend to imagine this completely disappearing. If you have chosen to just dismiss a portion of this, you can dismiss any portion of it when I say 3. If you've chosen to leave all of it here and still bring the other over to overlay, that can still happen of your choosing. I'll count to 3 now. And on 3, you choose what happens. 1, 2, 3. Thanking this and all or any portion or no portion of your choosing through the walls, through the mountains, through the treetops, into our atmosphere, beyond our atmosphere, into other atmospheres, and beyond until you can't even imagine seeing it anymore. Thank you. Now, if you would please, invite your choosing to take its place, or join of your choosing. Thank you. And now, if you would please, notice or pretend to notice the feeling inside of you now. Where's the feeling now? And what's the feeling inside of you now of your choosing? This is the paradigm shift. And what you may choose to do now is walk around your environment if you can a little bit, and especially be aware of any subtle differences in the environment that you may notice now. Thank you. This technique is the quantum walk. Now, before you stand up in front of me, make sure that you know exactly what it is that you consciously choose to walk to. And if you're ready, please stand up. Thank you. Now, if you would please, somewhere out in front of you on the ground, 3 to 5 feet or so in front of you, place whatever it is that you've chosen to walk to on the ground. All aspects in front of you, touching the ground, please. Thank you. And now, if you would please, where you are now, without what you've placed out there to walk to in a moment. Where you are now, if you would please, symbolize through the senses where you are now, without what you'll walk to in a moment. Giving it first, where you are now, a color and a shape. Thank you. And if you would please, where you are now, without having walked out yet, a sound. Thank you. And if you would please, where you are now, without that, a smell and a taste as you imagine. Thank Thank you. And if you would please, where you are now, without that's out there, a texture. Thank you. And where you are now, without that, an energy. Thank you. And now, if you would please, we'll sensory symbolize what you've placed out there. So if you would first please, what you've placed out in front of you, give it a color and a shape as you imagine. Or you can pretend you imagine any of these symbols. Thank you. And if you would please, give this out here a sound as you imagine. Thank you. And if you would please, give this out here a smell and a taste as you imagine. Thank you. And giving this out here a texture as you imagine. Thank you. And if you would please, giving this out here an energy as you imagine. Thank you. And now, if you would please, imagine the feeling this may bring you, where the feeling might be, and what the feeling might be like. Thank you. And now, if you would please, I'm going to have to ask you to, in a moment, let me explain this. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to begin to step out of here where you've began and focusing on the sensory symbols, the color and shape and sound out what you've placed out here. Focusing on the sensory symbols of what you've placed out here, please now begin to walk towards one step at a time. Seeing this color and shape out here, hearing its sound, smelling and tasting the smell and taste of this out here, feeling its texture, feeling the energy of it, focusing, please, on the sensory symbols of this that you're walking towards. And when you reach it, notice how it feels. And I invite you even, if you'd still truly like this, to go ahead and imagine and take a step beyond it into its future to assure you that this is truly what you prefer and what you like. And if this is truly, even in its future, as you like it, pivot around on one leg and step back into it, please. Thank you. And if this is as you prefer it to be, what you chose, still focusing on these sensory symbols here of what you've walked to, the sound of it, the color and shape, the smell and the taste, the texture, its energy, focusing on all of its sensory symbols, one step at a time, slowly please, walk back to where you began, focusing on the color and shape, the sound, the smell and taste and the texture, energy and feeling of all this you've walked to. And when you reach where you began, pivot around again. And notice how you feel. Notice the feeling inside. Where is it now? And what's it like? The object, the goal that you placed in front of you. Where is it now? If it came back with you, then you've done this technique, completed. If it hasn't come back to you yet, then continue focusing on its sensory symbols, walking back and forth until it returns with you. Thank you.